3 o'clock. We're going to start.
Perfect. I hereby call to order the Independent Ethics Review Board for the City of Sugar Land on Wednesday, June 22nd at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. First item on the agenda, public comment. Do we have any public comments at this time?
We do not have anybody signed up.
Okay. We do not have any public comments. Let's move to the next item. The next item is the review and the consideration of the minutes from the March 23rd meeting. Were there any changes or comments, concerns? I believe there was a modification to include Mr. Crosby's name on here. I do see it on the minutes. Are there any additional changes or comments? The minutes are current. May I
I
have
make a
a
motion that we accept the minutes with the changes as is. We have a second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes approved. The next item of the agenda is the article discussion. And we start regularly with our friends to the north that continue to experience some challenges with respect to their ethics board and their city council members. It was an issue regarding their signatures that were allegedly added to the agenda without consent of the council members. Does anybody have comments, observations from the article?
It's going on balance.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty predictable.
You make sure.
Well, just that this wouldn't really apply to us, right? Because it involves the city manager and city council. I guess the issue at hand involves the city manager, right? So this would be outside the scope of what we would review.
But it also incorporates council members. So it was and they were the ones that were alleging that their names were included on this memo without their consent. I thought it was interesting. So do we think this would apply under our code?
Yeah, I think it would depend on who added those signatures. If it was another council member or the mayor, then yes. But if it was somebody from city manager down, in our situation, they have their own ethics policy, rules, regulations that I would say, I would vote with you.
So the city employee issue.
So what's interesting and what came up in the article was the question of who would investigate it. So I thought that was, they were talking about the inspector general and that, is it self-governed and somebody that's appointed or that reports to the city manager actually investigating the case. So I thought it was a nice observation that, we have this secondary or independent board that could step in if it fell under our code.
But I think it sounds like fraud. And that's a legal issue to me, not necessarily an ethical issue. So I would think he's somewhere in a legal fashion would investigate it.
And what's funny is it alluded to that at some point. It said there was an attorney that said that if this were happening in my practice, it would be considered malpractice, which again is outside of the arena that we look at currently.
So that would go back to Meredith.
Let us not underestimate politicians outside of Sugar Land. They could have said, yeah, go ahead, put my name on it, and when there was a stink about it, saying, that was an auto pen, that's not actually me, because they don't want to be involved in this now public feud. So again, I refer it to Meredith's office.
Do all roads lead there?
Eventually, there or from.
So I included this article because I was curious as to how you would interpret on whether or not the code of ordinances applied, because I don't know. And I was interested in seeing your discussion on that. Hopefully we'll never be in that sort of position, but it was very, very thought provoking for me.
So this article did prompt a very, very quick search on the city site, and I was curious about, I know we have the code of ordinances, but within there, is there a code of conduct for city employees? And how that is governed?
We have an employee handbook that governs the code of conduct for city employees. And interestingly enough, ours is extremely more stringent than the council members' policies because we have fire police, we have different inspections, code enforcement permits, food inspections, animal control, and so we're subject to the penal code, and we're not allowed to accept gifts from anyone, whereas city council just has to brag about it once it reaches a certain dollar amount. We either return it or we put it in the public break room and put an email out to everybody, hey, we got fancy cookies, help yourself. And so if a city employee were alleged to do this, HR would investigate, and there'd be most likely a termination because we would consider it a forgery. But that is the long answer to your question, son. Yes, there is a code of conduct for employees.
Any other commentary around this particular article before we head west?
I was curious about the lump sum payout. It's at the bottom of page 12 of 32.
I think that's probably in the city manager contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless I do something criminal where you're out to fire me, you can get rid of me whenever you want. You're still obligated to cover
Employee contracts.
the rest of the salary. But it might be worth it. Like if they're a horrible city manager, spend the $400,000, get rid of them and put somebody in who will do a better job.
Are you alleging like if it were the city manager that put their name on the, then that would.
That's what exactly, because now it's saying no, the signatures are not authentic, but wait, I feel like everybody would know that, right? So who would put that name in?
I think that's the big question, who put the
Like who?
signatures on there? So if it were the city manager,
Who stands to gain?
yeah, sure. So, but I think if it were the city manager, it would also fall under the legal umbrella and likely would negate the payout, but it would depend on what's written in the contract. You're right.
One trail that doesn't lead to Meredith is the money trail, sadly. Don't pass up.
All right. So this was a very explicit in both forms of the word article, where there was, I'm going to use the term lightly, potential verbal abuse between a council member and the mayor. This prompted, thoughts, questions, observations around this article before I interject myself. It was definitely heated.
It got personal real fast.
Yes.
Well, I like how they had all of these codes of conduct, like practice civility, professionalism, refrain from making belligerent, personal, impertinent, and so on comments. That there was the need to have something like that in their code.
What's interesting, so when I looked at our code, we have in there the principles of personal conduct and ethical behavior that should guide the behavior of officials include and respect for the value and dignity of all individuals. And later on, it says they must conduct themselves with integrity in a manner that merits the trust and support of the public. So we don't get to the
All
specifications
the
that
examples
are,
of how things can go wrong.
Should be.
I don't know, that's the question. I'm assuming Meredith, that's, oh, go ahead.
The city council does adopt a resolution every year or two that talk about council protocols and talks about how you treat each other, how you conduct a meeting, how you put items on the agenda. So the civility and professionalism and decorum is actually covered under that resolution. But one of the questions that could be brought before you would be, would a violation of that code of behavior be a violation of an ethical issue under the ethics code, because it also requires you to act professionally and represent your citizens.
If we add it to the code, then if it's a situation where city council chooses not to sign that document every year or two, regardless of whether they decide to extend that, it's within our document. So it might be worth it to look at some of that wording and seeing.
It's actually a council resolution, and we just re-adopt it with some minor tweaks so that the new council members have an opportunity to have their name on it and publicly acknowledge that they're responsible for it. If they don't approve it, the last one still stands.
Okay. And if they violate that,
I question whether or not that would be under your authority, which is why I put the article on here. I wanted to talk through if you had the authority to enforce that under this code.
So in my opinion, I mean, it would depend on what the complaint stated and what it alleged and, you know, more of the specifications, but based on this article, it could fall under our purview because of, you know, the respect for the value and dignity of all individuals and the other parts of our code where they're representing their citizens. I don't know. What do you think?
I thought it was within scope.
Me too. I thought it was in scope.
It's not, it's different than what we normally discuss though, you know, where it's, you know, conflict of interest or what have you, but, and gifts and things of that nature. So it is definitely a different type of potential violation, but I do think that it could fall under our scope.
Yeah, you've made it quite clear your interpretation of gifts and conflict of interest. I'm pushing you into the gray areas so I can have a better understanding of your thought process in case a question does come up and they seek that get out of jail free card. I want to know what the temperature of this board is before I provide an answer.
you know, they can have differences of opinion. They can not even like each other.
Well, and
But
then,
if there's bullying to that extent, I think it's either ethics deals with it or it gets put out to the voters and they can decide at the next election, do they want somebody representing their district who acts that way?
and are there legal implications here? I mean, if it says he was physically threatened and different things of that nature, like, is there a circumstance where this goes a whole nother direction?
Well, if there's a threat, wouldn't the cops get involved? If the complainant,
But honestly, how often does anybody get involved until something happens? Right? A threat never really gets anybody moving along.
get you a visit.
It says, I mean, he says, shut your mouth or I'll shut it for you. That's pretty threatening.
And that honestly happens every day in people's homes. And, you know, the conversation is always, well, did anything happen? Did, you know, we'll have to wait until something happens.
Interesting. Probably not under our purview with the,
But it could be.
but it could be.
Choose
Could
to.
be, it could be.
I would be open to hearing it. So if a complaint was filed and it was something that we needed to investigate and research, I think it's not out of the realm of possibility for discussion.
So, Meredith, if somebody on city, well, let's not hit city council, but anyone covered by this document violated a city ordinance like that, who determines? So if they violate an existing ordinance, does that not come to us automatically if there's a complaint?
Well, it depends on which ordinance they might violate. If it's a zoning ordinance or traffic or code enforcement, it's not within this board.
But in this particular situation where they sign that document extending that ordinance,
It's a resolution policy. And so there's no criminal penalties for that. So it would only be a civil enforcement unless a criminal act occurred, which would be a separate investigation. Depending on how the complaint was filed, if they could articulate something that I could get this in front of you, I would like to be able to do that, because I think it's important for this board to make that determination rather than a staff member make that determination. I think that it's imperative that the citizens weigh in on your elected and appointed officials, as opposed to just one employee who gets a paycheck from those people. So based on your discussion, if I could find a way to get in front of you, I would.
I don't have a problem, and I think that if something like that, if they violate that resolution or any others that they're supposed to abide by, that it comes to the ethics commission and
I agree.
they might go, look,
I'd like
you two don't like each
Yeah.
other. Play nice in the sandbox, or one of you go home, there's nothing we can do. In fact, you don't want a city council where everyone goes, yep, and nobody questions anything. But you can do that civilly, politely.
So, in this dispute, the mayor was directly involved. Is the mayor considered an official?
Yeah, they're
Oh, yeah,
elected,
absolutely.
or appointed. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in our definition, it says official means member of city council. So city council, an administrative board, or advisory board. Is there somewhere else, or is there an assumption that I'm not connecting where the mayor's, part of,
But wouldn't the mayor be in those meetings?
He'd be a member of city council.
Right.
that's what, so the definition is the mayor a member of city council?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I was just
For the
looking,
charter.
okay. I was looking at the literal definitions, and so I
Sure.
wanted to make sure that that's
No
fully
loopholes.
incorporated.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good question, though. Thank you. I would hate for that loophole to be there.
Well, I just wanted to double check. I assumed it was my,
I think we
your-
discussed it way back in the task force days. Do we separate that out or not? And we were told that he is, he, she is, they are, it is, whatever.
Pronoun you want.
Right. That person
The individual.
who has that cool parking space just for the mayor is part of city council and therefore covered.
So just to verify, because your question really piqued me, section 2-12 definitions of the charter. As used in this charter, unless the context clearly means otherwise, the word or phrase city council, council, members of city council, and members of the council means and includes the mayor and the 6 council members.
thank you.
But thank you for bringing
There
that.
was if ever anything came up against the mayor, that this document very clearly incorporated that individual as well.
Yeah, them, they.
Yeah, that would definitely be something we would need to correct if that were there. So thank you.
Krista, what section of the code has the language about, basically the code of conduct, the civility?
The ethical, there's 2-72 ethical values. And what I was referencing
Okay.
was C and D.
Okay.
And that exact kind of questioning is what I hope everybody, as they read this document and serves after some of us roll off, that you think that way, that you, does it? I think it does. Show me where it does. Or if it doesn't, so be super critical like that.
Any other comments on El Paso and the lovely exchange? Okay. The last articles are from our neighbors, which was exciting to see because we've seen some of these other cities over and over again, probably to their detriment. But so our next door neighbors, they were restricting, and they brought it forth, and then it passed later on, and the part 2 of the article, but the restriction of doing business with former city council members, the proposal was initially 9 months, and I think it went to a year when it actually passed, so 12 months post-office. For former council members. And so then, we talked, as Meredith indicated, we've talked quite a bit about conflict of interest and needing to abstain when required. What
I just-
comment? Okay.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that it covered those who would be leaving office and not current members. Yes.
So what action do you take against somebody once they're out?
Yeah. Why that?
So our policy does state 24 months after they leave. And it covers contractors and appointed elected officials. So a sitting member can't lobby for some company to come in and get a contract for IT support. Do everything they can to get it, that contract enforced, and then when they leave, they go in and get a consulting job with that IT company because they helped push to get in a multi-million-dollar contract. And somebody who works for a company who's a contractor can't leave their company and work for the city for 24 months after, and that way it gives time for whatever they would be doing incorrectly to come to light. And
Actually, I apologize for interrupting. Section 2-85 limits it to 13 months.
on ours,
Yes, sir.
okay,
I believe task force asked 24 and council knocked it down to 13.
okay.
But there is a 24, 2-year.
2-year in 281.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
But that's not for, that's more like.
That one is, I'll just read it. For a period of 2 years after the termination of his or her city service, an official must not, on behalf of any other person for compensation, directly or indirectly, formally or informally act as an agent, attorney, lobbyist, or other sort of representative to or before his or her former board or commission. So it's a little bit different from the other section that is referenced.
If you would like 2-85 to go to the 24 months, we can certainly bring that to city council when we create a list of items we'd like for them to look at.
Do we know what the reasoning for 13 months was? A year plus one?
I believe they tied it back to the time for filing complaints. But I don't recall. It's been a few years and I'm sorry. But you also have different council members now than you did at the time this was passed.
And again, that was to stop somebody go one direction to the other. And I've seen where a company will come in, sell software or some piece of equipment, and then get hired by the state to then run that system, because what they sold or installed was either really complicated or wasn't up to par, or they want to leave the private sector and get a job where they put in 20 years and they get the pension and go. But it's also there to stop somebody from pushing and convincing the other council members or board members to approve something. And as soon as it's approved and when they leave now, hey, guess what? I work for the engineering company that's putting in that sewage system. And that's why we wanted 24 months, because it's quite a long time to wait.
Would you like me to add that to the list to take to council?
I would, it's,
Yes.
there's other people here.
Sure. Mhm.
general
Sure, okay.
consensus?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, because a lot of the your compete clauses in employment agreements are usually at least 2 years. Yeah.
I also included this as a segue to talk about a topic that board member Wolf emailed me. I don't know if you'd like to do that now or on the workshop when we get to that point.
Is it, I don't remember what it was. Is it pertaining to this?
We'll wait to workshop item 3 and I will email it back to you, sir.
Okay, I can search what I said.
Well, in that segue, any other comments on this particular article? Anything that relates back to our code?
Just that we should continue being the trendsetter in this community at large.
Yeah.
And let everybody copy our policy. This is that great,
Oh,
and we're so good.
I will say, kudos to y'all and Meredith for guiding hand, because even when we're looking at the procedures, and I made a mental note to say this during the hearing procedures, but we'll just go ahead and say it now. I mean, these are great. As somebody who works in the private sector about investigation procedures and policies and procedures around this kind of thing, like, these are really well written and well thought out. I mean, I know we're all playing a big hand and like thinking things through and like what the implications are before we add something. But I think it warrants the observation of like, what a great job our predecessors have done and Meredith is doing and continues to help steer us in the right direction, because, this took a lot of time and effort on her part as well, like putting these together and the wording, and it's all very, very nicely done.
Agreed. Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think apply based on rereading the email that you just sent. So the question I posed to Meredith was, is there anything that stops a board member from hiring a city council member, or the mayor hiring a board member or a city council member to influence the vote? So
Say it again.
Interesting.
is it, if the situation comes up where I'm on planning and zoning and I want something passed, and there's an engineer who works for city council, I offer them a position of employment, so now they work for me on planning and zoning, and then probably then push through a contract or something like that. Or if the mayor wants something done and the mayor has a company that can hire outside of work, a city council member. These are things that come up with one of the more. So, is that something that that our policy covers? So.
It is not something the ordinance covers.
Okay,
So do you want it to cover that?
So for clarity, we're talking about someone on council hiring a board member, like.
or vice, so anybody who's covered by this document, which could be planning and zoning, parks, animal control, us, another city council member, or the mayor. So could I, as one of those positions, hire somebody else to get their vote?
That'd be the same thing as a bribe. Or a favor. And I think that's covered. Now, you'd have to prove that that's why they did it. They hired them specifically for that purpose.
Well, that's why
Yeah.
I like to discuss this, get everyone's input.
So the individual that's the hiree, is a private citizen or somebody,
Anybody covered by this
so,
document, so
okay.
planning and
Both
zoning,
parties, both
hiring.
parties are covered by this document. Is that what you're,
Correct,
okay,
yep.
so it's two parties that are underneath the governance of this document, one hiring the other. The question arises from the intent to do so, to influence whatever capacity that they're serving in. So a council member could hire someone from zoning to influence what that board is doing. And then that board votes on something that then goes to council. Is that what you're?
Yeah, or let's say
I'm
we
just
actually
thinking-
got something to do, so I can come to these quarterly meetings, right? And I really like the person who the allegations are made of, so I offer 3 to 4 of you jobs, part-time, full-time, whatever it is. And then I use my influence as your source of income to get you to vote the way I want you to.
Would that be a conflict of interest?
Covered anyway, I mean, that would be a definite conflict, yeah. If you were doing the hiring for the reason of, getting benefit.
Is
from
that
it.
a help me out, what was the,
Yeah, we've talked
Prerequisite?
somewhat.
no, it's coming up, hold on, it's in our changes.
Yeah.
Where am I looking?
Right, so I think
Why
it's
can't I
tough
think of
to
this word?
prove.
Reciprocal benefit.
There we go.
Right,
Sorry.
it's tough to prove that
Would that,
I hired the 3 of you specifically for this. But if we make that something you're not allowed to
So,
do, then this commission doesn't even have to go as far as, why did you do that?
You could do that even just socializing though, too. I mean, either employment or you, hey, let's become best friends.
Mhm,
And I can influence you as a best friend.
mhm.
you
so
know?
we have recommended adding to the code the definition and incorporating reciprocal benefit. And that means an agreement or understanding with any other person wherein any official action or inaction by the official will be rewarded or reciprocated by the other person directly or indirectly. So do we think that would
I
Okay.
think that.
cover
Yeah,
this
I think
particular
that would cover it.
situation?
Yep. I
Yeah,
did, yes.
because it could happen in an employment situation, it could happen in a social situation,
Mhm.
your neighbors. Get stuck on a plane for 10 hours together. I think that would cover it.
Yep.
Yeah, if that covers it and we,
Any of those
if
situations.
we're recommending that that gets incorporated, then
Yeah.
I think that this particular theoretical situation would be covered.
Where was that?
It's in the proposed changes to the code. So last time we started talking about, possible things that needed to be incorporated or recommended. And it's one of the ones,
It's underlined. Yeah.
Page 32.
32, yes, thank you.
So I inadvertently took your items out of order. Do you want to go ahead and continue with that item?
Absolutely. Well, I think not necessarily, so I think we're finished with our article discussion unless anyone else has any comments. And then that would mean, no, it's still. Okay. I was trying to make the transition. Yeah, that's right. So then we will move on to the next agenda item that's, did we have, I'm sorry, Meredith, I got turned around. Do we have a separate item for the changes or is this covered by the hearing procedures that we're talking about?
You have a separate item on the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and skip to review of and discussion on possible revisions to the Code of Ethical Conduct, since it's top of mind in discussion. Thank you. So adding, the reciprocal benefit, what we just discussed, and so that could cover a number of things, which is nice, because you're not having to define all the different scenarios or situations that may arise where it could be problematic. Does anybody else have any comments around the definitions and the changes? that have been proposed from our last discussion.
I think it's good.
I like it.
Yeah.
I think it could create a challenge as far as like providing proof of the benefit. But I think that's anything. So I'm not saying that as a deterrent. I like the
Right.
language and I think it's great, but it's just one of those things too. If something comes up under that, prove we did this to
Right.
get this other benefit, they could be mutually exclusive and happen concurrently, but not, related. So I think that could present something that we could discuss as cases arise, or complaints rather. But it did prompt my thought process of like, what are the implications? So if this does happen, like, how do you prove like the causational relationship between the two necessarily? Or does it matter? I guess it may not even matter if you receive the benefit and you prove that you received the benefit, it doesn't necessarily.
So now let's make this really confusing. Probably won't happen. What if the board member already, or the city council member already works for somebody when they get elected or appointed?
Well, we're not saying that they can't. We're not saying that they
Alright,
can't
so
hire
that-
them.
that
We're just saying that they
determined
can't do it
is-
and expect favors.
Right. Correct. I don't want to, if I'm already working for
Well,
Suzanne Watley printing T-shirts, and I decide to run for city council, and she's already on city council. That shouldn't preclude me from running because I'm already her employee, and it shouldn't require her to leave city council because that relationship occurred prior to both people serving on it.
well, and-
Now, if they're voting on a T-shirt contract, then that would require her
Yeah,
to
yeah.
disclose
Oh,
and
yeah.
and
But
abstain.
we're not even saying that they couldn't, one of them couldn't hire the other.
Yeah.
We're saying they can't do it and expect favors and
Yeah,
reciprocal
For
benefits.
the reasons of
Right.
receiving
Yeah.
benefit. for it.
Yeah,
Right.
And it goes back to self-reporting. I mean, if you're looking at something that's, you think it's gonna look fishy, then you probably need to be contacting Meredith anyway and say, look, here's the situation, and then make sure everything's documented properly.
gold standard of the smell test.
That's right.
Front page of the news. So any other comments on those? Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna respond back to Ted's comment. I was unable to find any ethics language related to self-reporting for cities. We've now expanded our search to look like in private corporations. So we have the conflicts disclosure forms, and we were trying to come up with a broader, I violated the code form and go from there. So we are still searching. I owed you that and did not find it yet. So I was just reporting back on that item.
Self-reporting or,
Yes.
document of disclosure, some type of deal like that.
I think we discussed last time before about if somebody realizes they did something wrong and they.
Yeah, we talked about
Right,
that.
that they would most likely receive a lecture as opposed to it will reduce whatever penalty they get.
What
I
about,
think-
see, before something happens to say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is my intent,
Well, that's her get out of jail free card,
Yes,
she-
Right, if they go to you first, Meredith, right? Say, I'm thinking about doing this, is that cool? And you say yes. Then if somebody files a complaint, less likely that we would get it because that activity had already been,
It's been disclosed.
or
No.
less like someone would file a complaint maybe.
If a complaint is filed on an item I've given an opinion on, it still gets forwarded to you, but you get a copy of my opinion stating that I had reviewed it. And this is why I send you these articles. I'm trying to get a feel as to how you interpret the code so that when I write these get out of jail free cards, which are not truly get out of jail free. Just my first ethics class I taught was using Monopoly as the game, and so it kind of stuck. But you still have an opportunity to determine whether or not my opinion was correct or not. It just lets you know that they acted in part based on reliance of my interpretation. And then we have the settlement provisions where somebody has a complaint filed and they say, oh yeah, you're right, I messed up, and you have an opportunity to do that without a full-blown hearing. What we don't have is the middle ground where the official comes to you all or comes to city secretary or me and says, oh my goodness, I just realized I messed up. Can you tell the board what, or how should the board punish me? And so we don't have that, and that's what I thought you were asking. On the self-reporting is the, let me confess and go ahead and get punishment, and I did not find language for that.
So we've got that already in there. Added. Self-report.
We don't have the proposed language yet, but we have it as an item
Right.
to have an avenue for self-reporting.
Yes. I did not find language in any city policies or ordinances, and we've now expanded our scope to look at private corporations to see if they have any policies or provisions that would allow a confession and then a charging without a complaint being filed.
They could just file a complaint against themselves.
I don't think the likelihood of that is strong.
Well, if they're gonna confess,
They're not precluded from
I
doing
mean, they're already saying, I messed up, I confess, so just file a complaint against yourself.
that.
I think we would take it a lot lighter. I would, if they confess that way.
I know we have that with the Department of Agriculture. If we realize, oops, we did
Yeah.
something wrong, we can self-report.
Right.
And take care of it. It's a lot easier than when
Yes.
the
Right.
Department of Agriculture inspector catches that you, oops, did something wrong.
Yeah, so almost every major regulatory body has an avenue to self-report, and it's, in the healthcare space private, so, I mean, it's a constant thing of self-reporting, right or wrong, but point being that this is commonplace outside
Yeah.
of, what we're discussing. What's probably not commonplace is when you write a code of conduct or code of ethics, that it incorporates a self-reporting provision. So the regulatory bodies offer like the self-reporting opportunities, but I'm trying to think back on some of the codes I've worked on. I can't think of one where we incorporated like, if you violate the code, but you violated the code, you didn't mean to, you can report it internally. So,
Yeah.
I'll have to flip through some of the ones that I helped draft
Well,
just to see.
I don't think we want a situation where he says, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and violate it and self-report, because I get a lesser penalty,
Right.
Well, it's one of those that goes back to like good faith, right? Like I didn't do this intentionally. I want to report it in good faith to let you know that I did this.
Right.
I think a real possibility is somebody voting on something where they should have abstained and they didn't
They
realize
realize
that
it-
they
they
had
realize it
a
later.
certain amount of interest or over the dollar amount or whatever it is. I think that to me, like, I think what scenario where would that be necessary? And if I voted on something that I shouldn't have and then I realized it after the fact.
That actually happens.
Sure.
And when that happens, because you must file within 5 days of realizing you have a conflict, we catch it, we give them the form. And as long as a majority vote pass the item, it's really no harm, no foul, and we get them to fill out the form. So that has actually occurred a number of times. It's not as rare as you might think it is. I'm not saying it happens monthly, but maybe once or twice a year, we do catch on that someone voted on an item without recognizing that a sub-consultant or a subcontractor was actually their employer, we've had to go back.
So in that scenario, if you didn't, if it was not acknowledged within the right time frame, then they would possibly need to do a self-report. Like if
They already have a self-report because we give them the form, the conflicts disclosure form. You have 5 days from the date you discover the conflict to file it with the Secretary's office.
okay, sorry, I thought it was 5 days from the vote, so 5 days from discovering, that's,
Which is typically the day of the vote, yes, ma'am. Because you're sitting up there and you go, oh, wait, this sounds familiar. Or the contractor gets up there and says, oh, I'm subcontracting with so-and-so to do the pavement for this portion of it. And they go, oh my gosh, I've sat up here, but the code of ordinances says I should have left the room. At which point we give them a form and we're good. Or at least we consider that to be good.
So the usual scenario is when they, it's during a meeting, but can it also happen days later? And if so, how do you pinpoint the discovery date as the starting point for counting the 5 days?
It could happen any period of time later. We just generally say the date of the meeting, that the agenda item, if you had questions, or if it was reasonably able to be determined. We usually don't lose sleep as long as there is enough other votes to pass the item and the item's not voided, which is what would have happened under state law.
is there ever a scenario where it's the same council member and it happens repeatedly?
No. We do have a database. So every time a conflict of interest form is filed, the council member or the board of commission member, and that whatever that conflict may be, my wife's company, my son's company, my company, and my son-in-law, my whatever. And we have that. And then when we run agendas, we do a double check. So staff is spending quite a bit of time running these traps to try to catch them ahead of time, which is why sometimes at a council meeting, you'll see an item that's an action item that looks like it should clearly have been on consent. But because the council member has a conflict, we pull that off so they can vote on everything else on consent and then leave the room for that one item. But every effort is made to find it ahead of time if we possibly can.
Yeah, so for the name clearing proceedings, the recommended changes are incorporated here. Does anyone have any comments or concerns or discussion around respective language?
Page
So,
32 of
it's page
33, down at the bottom, the underlined section. Ted, the bottom of this page, or somewhere, you can
Get you all over here.
okay.
Oh, that's the next one, sorry. Go ahead. So it just makes the current section a little bit more robust. It incorporates the 90th calendar day.
Looks good to
Everybody's
me.
good with
Yeah.
draft language? Looks great. The only comment or question I have, should city secretary be capitalized? No?
So Meredith, if I understand this, we'll propose this to city council, is that correct, for them to adopt it? These changes?
So when we get a list that you feel is sufficient, I will ask the city manager to put a workshop item on a council agenda, and you will be invited to go to that meeting and talk these revisions through with city council. I will be there to help, obviously, but these are your revisions, not mine. I'm happy to draft and research all day long, but this is your code, and this needs to be what you, as a representative of your neighbors, believe to be good changes, not what I think would look pretty on paper. So you will have the opportunity to present it to city council.
What's the standard convention? Is it annually that any code is kind of up for revision? And
That's a very good question. We don't really have timeframes or sunsets on too many of our ordinances. However, last fall, Councilmember Kamali asked that we go through and do that. And I just completed phase 1 of the review of the ordinances. And so phase 2 is coming up. So your opportunity to get on a workshop is better than you think it might be, because I can put this on the workshop sooner rather than later. And this can be included. But we do need to put it, and that may be something that would be advisable for you all to recommend to be added to this ordinance, is that it be periodically reviewed every 2 years, every 5 years, like the charter is reviewed every 5 years. So perhaps that would also be a good time frame for this one.
I think 5 makes sense for me. Code, as long as we continue to look at it critically and thoughtfully when we go through articles and we go through issues that may arise that may warrant a revision. But I think on just a regular recurring cadence, 5 years makes sense. Codes of conduct and codes of ethics don't get reviewed annually or semi-annually like policies and procedures typically do, because it's such a large document and it's broader in nature versus like very specific. So, I mean, we do get into granular specific details, but as far as like a procedure versus like a code.
And that doesn't preclude from something being added to it if a
Yes,
situation comes up, which just means we're not going to panel the task force.
right. Where like, you know, it's a formal review process. We look at the whole, the document in its entirety and take that.
Mr. Wolf, as someone who participated in that last time, do you have any comments related to that? Is 5 years appropriate?
I think the document review was written by geniuses. I think we did discuss it at some point, and we thought 5 years was reasonable. It gives us enough time to have a functioning policy, and then if trends in human behavior start to change, it's not going to be so quick.
Would it make sense to put language in there if we talk about that it's on a, you know, recurring review cycle of every 5 years, or as changes are determined necessary based upon the board
yeah, I think
recommendations?
a formal review
Yeah.
every 5 years,
Yeah.
but still
Open to.
periodic review.
Yes.
More frequently.
I can do that.
Just that way it explicitly allows for changes in between review cycles.
Yes.
Oh, council will make changes whenever they deem it necessary. They will not wait 5 years. I can assure you of that.
Were there anything in the code itself outside of these recommendations that anyone else wanted to bring up?
So Meredith,
Yes, sir.
anybody who serves on a board or commission, are they there at the pleasure of city council? Or can city council remove them? So if somebody upsets the mayor or city council, or a member of city council, but doesn't commit any crime,
Or violation of the code?
right, can city council say, or can the mayor say, I don't like that person, I want them off?
The mayor cannot individually do that. The city council would have an executive session to discuss whether or not an appointed individual is meeting their requirements under the code. Typically, it's something like attendance, where somebody has missed a number of meetings and we're not able to have a quorum and conduct business. And they will get a phone call from the staff liaison. And if it continues, then from the mayor saying, you know, your attendance is an issue for us. We're having quorum problems. The only board that city council cannot unilaterally remove a member from is the zoning board of adjustment. That does require a hearing for cause.
The
The council typically,
particularly this committee be protected. So if somebody on this committee is either leading an investigation or makes the charge or allegation, that they can't be removed by anybody who could be the target of the investigation.
that would not happen unilaterally. I would find it very questionable if council as a whole would decide to remove somebody from the Independent Ethics Review Board as a review is going forward, since that would defeat the purpose of your board.
But in order to remove somebody, it would take, it would be a majority vote, unanimous vote by city council.
It would take a vote of 4. Typically, this board is an exception, and as is P and Z, well, ZBA too. But most boards are appointed for 1 year. And so each individual is evaluated for attendance and participation after that year as to whether or not they'll be reappointed. I think it's highly unlikely for someone to be removed midterm.
All right. I created 2 of them.
Sure.
You, Meredith, regularly talk about being aware of what hats we wear and where we are. I think it's really important as election season comes up that all the members of this commission, you're on this commission because you know somebody from city council, or you wouldn't have been appointed. I think we have to remember that in public and on social media, you will never, as long as you're a member of this commission, be able to completely take that hat off. And if you're friends with somebody and they're running, be mindful of public support that may come back to taint the reputation of the commission should that person have a complaint filed against them, have not done anything wrong, and is acquitted or the charges are totally dropped. And somebody comes up and goes, yeah, but on Facebook or Instagram, I've seen these pictures of you supporting that person. How could you be best friends with them, go golfing and vacationing with them, and not have it not pass the smell test? So I just want to make sure everyone understands that as long as you hear that hat is on you, and that we're careful.
So you're discussing like perceived conflicts or perceived
Right.
bias.
Right, so, if I'm friends with the mayor and we go golfing together, I don't play golf, but if we did, he'd win. And somebody files an allegation against him and like, he didn't do anything wrong, like this document didn't violate anything on it, and we vote to drop it or acquit it, people will still have a potential view that, oh yeah, he golfs with the chair of that committee. Of course, they're not gonna do it. And our whole basis of the smell test, we need to be vigilant of all the time, because you can't totally take that hat off with everything that we all post.
So the concerns you're discussing are like a perception of an inability to maintain your independence. So we're an independent ethics review board. We have to be non-biased or unbiased rather, when a complaint is filed. And if there is a public perception where we may be favorable towards somebody governed by this document, that it could cause doubt, public doubt,
Yeah.
in the ability to be independent and unbiased. So should a complaint arise, and
So posing a picture of somebody, I think that's fine. If you post like, hey, I'm really good friends with so-and-so, please donate to their campaign. I think that starts to get into an area where it's, maybe not. But you'll make that decision. Just be aware of it.
Now, does our code even cover the possibility of a board member contributing to someone's campaign?
I think
I
we're
think
still
it's-
allowed to as a private citizen, or
I
even
mean,
if
that's
we have a
become
company.
public information.
Yeah. It just won't look good if I've gone out solicited funds for somebody to campaign for city council, and then something happens, and now I'm supposed to judge this person, but I told the whole community they're really great. I'll get them in there. And it's never happened, so I don't think we need to worry about it completely, but we're all getting so used to everything we do, we post online. And that can always come back.
It goes back like we talked about, though, like, you know, if a mayor comes out and there is, as mayor of such and such, I support this. So it would be as a board member, say, as a board member,
Correct.
compared to doing it as a private citizen.
Right, so if,
Because you go back, I mean, you know, relationships before you were ever on the
Absolutely.
board,
And-
there's.
right, and none of us are on this board because we don't know somebody on city council. They're the ones that you said, hey, I'm interested in serving on this, and they went in with a list and said, I want this person there.
Just how you represent it when you post it.
Mhm.
You can't
Absolutely.
come forward and say, as a member, I think this person's more ethical than the other.
Right, as a
That
member of
would
the
be very-
IARB, I can tell you this
Yeah.
candidate's never been complained against, that, no. And the other, it was a campaign issue. So the two at-large council members, I believe, a lawyer in town who does not want more apartments here. He owns a law firm, I believe. This is named after him. Sponsored a fundraiser for two members of city council. Don't have it in writing, but it's an easy assumption that that was done because those two members will vote whether or not those apartments can be developed.
I'm going to ask you to be very careful with your conversations, since anything related to that is still within the statute of limitations for a complaint to be filed, to be brought forward to your board. And you do not want to deliberate on anything that you may have jurisdiction over.
Okay.
I recognize your concern, but just want to caution you.
Well, then I'll stop my.
Being accessed by the internet, so just
Okay.
don't pre-deliberate.
Pardon?
Please don't pre-deliberate.
Right, no.
well, so but to that end, we don't have the details of any situation because we haven't gone down that pathway. But if there was a situation that there's concern about that falls under the governance of the code, one of the board members are able to file a formal complaint, and then it comes to the board separately, right?
Yes, ma'am. And you can always ask a hypothetical question. Hypothetically, if we had a local business person who wanted to host a campaign fundraiser for two council members and go that way, don't use specifics because it looks like you're pre-deliberating.
Okay, no, then, so in that situation, the company is viewed as an individual in the eyes of the law, correct?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So a company, in the eyes of the law, a corporation is also viewed as an individual or a
It's-
person.
Yes, sir, it's a person.
So my concern about the situation is, are they trying to influence the outcome of a vote? And I think as a citizen, you have every right to speak to your city council members about something that you're concerned or you want to happen, or you don't want to happen. That's why they're there. Where is there a line and where does it get crossed if that person donates to a campaign in hopes of influencing a future vote? Would that require them to recuse themselves from a vote?
So maybe past campaign contributions. Because we talked about business interests, business transactions, but instead of that, looking at past campaign contributions, does that need to be covered under this as well? Is that the question?
I think that's, yeah, I mean, you have free speech, and you can talk with your money if you want. And somebody should be able to voice their opinion and desire for something to happen or not happen. But at some point, it's got to cross a line, or does it?
I think it does when it comes to campaign contributions, significant ones.
If I put up $40,000 just because I want you to run, and you get elected,
I thought,
there's a chance I'm gonna come to you at some point and go, hey.
I thought campaign contributions were excluded in our code.
I mean, you
I thought.
look at any
We'll
government
have to read it.
official, look at all the lobbyists, I mean, you look at every senator, representative, I mean, look at all the money they get from corporations and businesses.
Yeah.
It's not because they think they've got pretty
Right.
hair.
They donate equally to both.
Yeah.
I guess when it comes back to them, if they're, so if it's, I think getting to your question is the law firm of individual or person versus not. I think if the campaign contribution goes back to, if there's a benefit that goes back to the corporation. That would be huge.
It's a
And-
personal,
Do I have the right as a citizen or a company owner to give as much money as I want to any politician running for any office?
well, think a campaign, because that's all governed and that money is used to go toward that person's election. It's not personal money. Now, if it was money given personally, yes,
Yeah.
that would definitely be a violation, but it's a campaign contribution. I mean, people are going to support who they think is going to help their business. So it's not going straight in their pocket, but
No.
if you
Yeah,
look
I
at
mean,
if you look at their records from their campaign contributions, and they were skimming money off of it,
Yeah.
it would be a difference.
That's why I brought it up, because we're not like any other city, we're not like any other government. We run ourselves cleaner and better. It's an area where influence and money meet. I'm not saying we need to do anything about it.
Is there
This is
any,
something we need to discuss.
is there anything outside of this document, Meredith, that would govern or speaks to some of the concerns that are being discussed currently?
Yes. But because it was not posed as a hypothetical, I'm very hesitant to weigh in on this as I may have a conflict of interest. And I do not want to do anything that, in the unlikely event a complaint is filed, would cause a problem for the board. And I know that's a cop-out answer, but
It's a fair
I am,
answer.
But I gotta believe there's some state law that
Yeah,
covers, it. And I don't know what that's, but I'm sure it's covered somehow.
absolutely, it would be covered under the elections code.
Yes.
There are opportunities for that to be investigated by boards other than your own. And if you have concern about just members of this board having that conflict, remember you do have 2 alternates. So if one person is perceived to have not worn their hat just at the right angle and correctly, they could be asked to step aside and you still have alternate. You'll be able to get it.
I don't want anyone to give up their freedom to support whoever they want and get other people to vote for it. I just want to make sure that when we do that,
But I do think it's fair for for us to be an independent board, we have to also appear to be independent. Not only be independent, but you have to have that appearance as well.
Yes.
And I think that's fair. Or we lose the public trust, and we don't want to do that. So,
and luckily, like the Maytag repair guy, or whatever, we sit around and talk to him, and God willing, it stays like that forever. That's all I have to say.
So I know that we're over time. I wanted to just very quickly, so that we can decide what to do moving forward with this other agenda item. So relating to the review of and discussion on, oh, that's the wrong one. Would you believe I've done it twice? Okay, review of and discussion on the ethics hearings procedures. If I recall correctly, these have kind of our final tweaks and changes incorporated. Meredith, is
Yes.
that your understanding as well?
My spelling errors have been reviewed and corrected, yes, ma'am.
So,
I don't promise I got them all, but I got the ones you pointed out.
Meredith, do these also become part of the code and get presented to city council?
City council will approve them as procedures. It does not get adopted or codified.
Okay. But would it be fair that we would present these at the same meeting as the other changes to the
I
code?
know, I don't understand. Sorry.
Would it be,
I can arrange that, yes, sir.
So in that vein, does anybody have any other comments that we need to do this again on this agenda item next meeting to have other changes? Or is everybody comfortable with where this document has landed?
Comfortable with it.
I'm comfortable.
Okay.
So I do have just one question.
Sure.
And it's a hypothetical. So hypothetical based on reality. So if there is a member of council who has been, where a complaint, an ethics complaint has been filed for another body that they are affiliated with, it certainly is not covered under our code, but say that individual got cleared, but the people who are after that individual are looking for another source or another place to file a complaint. Should our code in some way either protect or have some way of addressing that? Does that make sense? Am I too hypothetical?
Oh, I exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, Meredith, thank you.
Councilman 57, did something at work or outside, they were
So,
cleared.
yeah, serving on another public body
Okay,
and got cleared, no issue there, but the people who were going after them could like try to find an alternative. Well, they, this member also serves on city council for Sugar Land. So should our, theoretically,
But I think they could be free to file an ethics complaint and we would handle it with our procedures.
they didn't violate our policy.
Yeah.
And
And
dog to work. and
He
you're not
he
allowed
could
to
probably
dogs to
come to
work.
us and say, I want my name cleared under the name clearance procedure.
sure,
So
sure, okay.
I don't think we should say because he's been cleared somewhere else, you can't file here.
But on the other hand, we don't want them going after elected or appointed official here, because they didn't get satisfaction somewhere else, and they're just looking to throw mud.
Yeah.
Well, but our rules may be different than their rules, and so what may be a violation of one entity's rules is not a violation of another one, depending on how it is worn.
We don't want to rely on somebody else's standards because we set the standards for our body in Sugar Land, and we have, you know, as Meredith said, we have our own rules.
Well, in this case, it was clear, this person was clear, I don't know, hypothetically, it makes sense to say hypothetically, I don't know. But it was basically dismissed because their code didn't even, or I don't think they even had a code for this issue. So they couldn't give a opinion on it. Okay,
So, but if he violated our code, they should be free to come to us.
Well, this is, if somebody commits a misdemeanor in Texas, we have the authority to dismiss them for less. Does that account, does that make, if it's any state? And they.
I'm-
So-
You threw me at me, now I'm confused.
Okay, in our policy, it says, I think you commit a class B or above misdemeanor. It's reason for removal. Does that crime have to occur in Texas, or it could be anywhere that they were convicted of serious crime or moral turpitude?
So the language that we incorporated where it says if you have been committed of a crime of moral turpitude, then you forfeit
And that's if they committed
office.
anywhere. They go to Vegas and forget that. Doesn't always stay in Vegas.
I'm sorry, where is this in the code? I thought that was the charter.
It's in the charter.
Okay, all right.
It is in the charter.
But if they commit a crime anywhere.
The
it's above-
election code would prevail and we'd follow what the election code says. A conviction's a conviction.
It's not a hypothetical situation that I know of. It's just.
So Meredith,
No,
when
I-
you, sorry. When you mentioned the prospective workshop, what is the timing around that?
I would need to get with the city manager because we are entering very quickly budget season. And so that means council has 2 meetings a week. One regular council meeting on some weeks plus the budget meeting. And so we're very conscientious as to what we put on the agenda and try to be respectful of their time. Possibly July or August, but I think that might be awfully soon. I would think more like September timeframe.
Okay, and so we'll have ample time to prepare like our discussion points and things of that nature prior to the meeting. I just want to make, whenever it does, you know, whenever the agenda, whenever the situation arises where we're prompted to discuss and present before council, that we'll have the right opportunities to prepare and
That's a very, very valid point. I will make sure that it occurs either after your next quarterly meeting or you have a special meeting ahead of time so that you're ready to go and I have all the documents prepared for you.
thank you. That was where I was headed.
Excellent point, yes, ma'am.
Are there any other items for discussion today? May I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion with this wonderful meeting adjourned.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Meredith.
you.
Did Mr. Loeb vote? I didn't see his hand.
Feel better. Feel better.
Care.
Did he vote?
We just said meeting adjourned.